Now, if anybody has known me for a long time, you know that I am not a math whiz. In fact, much of the math work that my kids are doing right now in high school is beyond my capacity of understanding. In fact, I read a quote one time, I'll probably mess it up, but it says something to the effect, when they introduced the alphabet to math, everything went downhill, or God cursed the day when they introduced the alphabet to math or something. When they started putting letters in mathematics, I was done. I was done. This is in 10th grade. So the title of the text is, here today, probably, if you're a math whiz, not a correct title. So now you understand where I'm coming from when I say that I'm not a math whiz. So the text title is called P times 4 equals P. The letter P times 4 equals P. Now, here are some of the P's that we're going to talk about here today. The first P is problems. All of us have problems. Some of us have small problems compared to the rest of us with larger problems. The second P is pruning. Pruning, P-R-U-N-I-N-G, pruning. The third P is people. The fourth P is pressure. And the equal P is performance. So we go problems, pruning, people, pressure, and performance. Bill Gates, many of you don't know who Bill Gates is, but Bill Gates was the guy who introduced Microsoft and Windows to most of us. His first business failed. In fact, he and his partner, Paul Allen, tried to sell it, and the product wouldn't even work. Gates and Allen, the story says, didn't let that stop them from trying again. So they kept trying and kept trying and kept trying. And some of us who are non-Apple users, which are probably more and more few of us, or less and less of us who are not using them, realize that if he didn't stick with it, then we would not have experienced it. Now there's a lot of biblical people in the Bible who have experienced issues and problems and challenges that we read about often. So I just want to run through a list of them, and then we're going to drill down in just a few of them. The Apostle Paul had issues. Paul had issues with people. He had issues with his past. In fact, we read in Scripture that Paul said that he had to, in essence, he said he had to let go of the stuff that he did when he was a little younger for the sake of focusing on what was ahead of him. It's true. Moses, we've read the story over and over again, but Moses had issues too. He had struggles with his own insecurities that, in his mind anyway, was going to keep him from realizing what he was chosen to do in this life. David took what didn't belong to him. In fact, he had a guy killed because he wanted what he shouldn't have had. I'm not going to get a show of hands here of some of us who have taken stuff that didn't belong to us. We'll just all look the other way. Now Solomon, David's son, one of David's sons, had issues too. And in fact, he had many issues. He had hundreds of issues. Some would call them wives. He had over 700 wives. He had 300, I'll call them in modern day terms, he had 300 girlfriends on top of his 700 wives. Can you imagine the TV show that could be out today if Solomon was living today with 700 wives? And there's a show out called Sister Wives, I think, and this guy has 5 wives or 4 wives. Jeremiah in the Old Testament, he had struggles too. In fact, Jeremiah didn't think, or he thought that because he was young, that he really couldn't do too much. And then we have Peter in the New Testament. Peter, he thought that he was going to be the strongest guy in the group. If everybody leaves, you can count on me. And then Peter realized that when stuff got really hard, when temptation, when struggles, when intimidation, when fear got really, really loud, Peter was one of the first that said, I like you, but I don't love you. Remember that story? And then we read also in the New Testament about a guy named Tommy. Or the King James calls him Thomas. Thomas, he says, unless I see it, I won't believe it. I think a lot of us have been in situations in our lives that unless we see it, we're not going to believe it. The older I get, the more and more I'm there. And that's not a good thing, by the way. So turn over to Genesis chapter 26. Genesis chapter 26. Let me set the scene for you. The story's about Isaac. And Isaac was and I'll use the term in quotes, the chosen son of Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah lived, give or take, 3,000 years ago, maybe 4,000 years ago. I didn't get the date before I stood up here. But they lived more than a few years ago. And they were older, meaning in their 90s. And then once upon a time, they were promised that they were still going to have a baby. Now, if I was 90-some years old and somebody, even God, promised me a baby, I'd beg him, please, no. Too old for babies. So in fact, in the story, it said that when the promise came, that the wife, Sarah, or Sarai at the time, laughed. You got to be kidding me. Not even possible. So longer story short, they had this baby. There's more into it, but I'll keep it light. They had this baby, Isaac. Well, eventually, Abraham and Sarah passed away. Isaac grew up, got older. So we're in the story here in Genesis chapter number 26, starting in about verse number 1. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous one that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, however you want to say it, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, which is on the west coast of that part of the area. Verse 2, the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. So that suggests to me, just a regular guy here, that says that maybe Isaac was heading to Egypt when God said, don't go to Egypt, which suggests to me that he was heading that way. So verse 4. He says, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and I'll give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants, listen, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my law. So Isaac is getting blessed because Abraham did the right thing. So verse 6. So Isaac lived in Gerar, I'll say it. Verse 7, when the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she is my sister. Now, let's go back in history a little bit. That happened the same way. We're going to get to that in a minute. But that happened to Daddy. Daddy did the same thing. Because Daddy was afraid that foxy Sarah was going to be kind of taken into the harem of this king. So I thought, well, if it worked for Daddy, then it might work for me too. You with me today? So it came about, let me back up. So when he asked about his wife, he said, she's my sister, because he was afraid of my wife, thinking, the man of this place might kill me on account of Rebecca. That was one of his wives' name. By the way, back then they were allowed to have multiple wives. I'm not suggesting that, I'm not recommending that today, but in that era, in that time, that was how it was. Verse 8. It came about, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through the window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing his wife Rebekah. Now, I didn't go into the ancient verbiage of what caressing might mean. Use your imagination. We'll leave that alone. Verse 9. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she's my sister? And Isaac said unto him, because I said I might die on account of her. So in verse 10, Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, or had sex with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech charged all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." So listen to this, verse 12. Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. Now wouldn't that be cool if there was an investment like that? A real legitimate investment like that? In a Bank of America or PNC or Susquehanna or some mutual fund? Again, verse 12. Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household. So that the Philistines, listen, so that the Philistines envied him. Remember now, he's in the west coast of that part of the world, right? Where the, quote, enemy lived. He was doing well. The king protected him and his wife. His investments did well. And then he started to get envied. The next verse. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham the father, the Philistines stopped up by filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you're too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley and settled there. Now verse 18. Then Isaac, this is where it gets interesting. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. Without water, you can't survive. Without water, you can't grow. You can't stay settled. You can't feed your herd. You can't plant much, right? Because the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham, and he gave them the same names he had given them. Verse 19. But when Isaac's servants dug up in the valley and found there was a well of flowing water. So the herdsmen, the guys who lived there, because that was their heritage, lived there saying, "That water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. Verse 21. Then, listen to this, then they dug another well. How many of us give up after our first well gets kind of overflowed, right? Verse 21, then they dug another well and they crawled over to and named it, and they called it a name. Verse 22, he moved away from there and yet dug another well. Anybody have people in your life that you just cannot please them no matter what you do? Right? And he crawled over it, so he named it, and they didn't crawl over it, so they named it Rehoboth. Last, Lord, it made room for us and we will be fruitful in the land. Then, verse 23, then he went from up there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him and said that night, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you." Listen, I will multiply you and I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of your father Abraham. Again, so he built another altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug as well. So again, Isaac moved from place to place because the Philistines didn't want him in the neighborhood. You see, I came up with this quote the other day. But problems have a way of creating steel in your spine. Problems have a way of creating steel in your spine or jello in your soul. Steel in your spine or jello. For those who don't know what jello is, it's a dessert that's like eating air. There's not much to it. It's water and flavoring, and that's really about it. You can't make a meal out of it because it's a bunch of mush. It's nothing to it. So troubles can make you tough, or troubles can make you wishy-washy. And I'll be the first to tell you that some days wishy-washy is the preferred option, because sometimes you don't feel like being tough. Sometimes you don't feel like being the person that you're supposed to be. Story says Sylvester Stallone, iconic actor and most successful actors, wrote and starred in 3 Oscar-winning and 10 nominations Rocky films, and which he became the franchise, starring as John Rambo, and got steps. In fact, he was famous and he had names of places all over the country. But complications his mother suffered during childbirth, forced her obstetricians to use 2 pairs of forceps during his birth. Misuse of these accidentally severed a nerve and caused paralysis in parts of Stallone's face. So as a result, the lower left side of his face was paralyzed, including parts of his lip, tongue, and other parts, which gave him this slurred speech. And we thought it was just an accent. It's really because of his birth. So did that stop him from pursuing what he really wanted to pursue in life? There's a guy named Frederick Douglass, who was born a slave and raised in an environment that wasn't fair by anybody's standards. But yet he chose to rise above that, and not only rise above that for himself, but was able to save so many other people's lives as a result of him not allowing his surroundings to dictate and his problems to dictate where he was going to end up in life. And then the story is about a lady named Bethany Hamilton. She was raised by surfers in Hawaii, and Bethany was born in the water, a natural surfer. She began competing professionally as just a young child. However, the story says, at age 13, just 13 years old, she lost her arm and nearly lost her life in a vicious shark attack. 1 month after that, she was back on the surfboard again. 1 month later, she wasn't going to let a mere shark bite stop her from competing and doing what she really loved to do. And some of us go through stuff that's far less challenging with our problems, and we come up with this excuse and that excuse and that excuse why we can't get back on the surfboard again. When those of us who really understand how life works, you're going to fail way more times than you're going to succeed. The difference is getting back up on the surfboard every single time. So the problems will really keep you digging wells, as Isaac understood. The second P is pruning. Turn over to John chapter 15. John chapter 15 in the New Testament tells this story about pruning, which we're going to get a little deeper into that word momentarily. But in St. John chapter 15 in the New Testament, it says in verse 1, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Verse 2 says, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Now again, in that culture, it was a very, it was a culture that grew stuff all the time. They were either shepherds or they grew stuff. In this case, the example, the theme here is about grapes. So again, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, listen, he prunes it so it may bear more fruit. Again, he prunes it so it will bear more fruit. Verse 3, you are already clean because the word which I've spoken to you abide in me and I in you, and the branch, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine. Verse 5, I am the vine, you're the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. I don't know about you, but I want to bear much fruit. I want to do something with my life, right? For apart from me, you can do nothing. Verse 6. If anyone does not abide in me, he's thrown away as a branch and dries up, and gathered from them and cast them into the fire, and they're burned. Verse 7. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified in this, that you bear much fruit. Of course, the story goes on. But the King James Version of this text says, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he's taken away, and every branch that beareth fruit, listen, the King James says he purgeth it, so that it might bring more fruit. Now that word, purge, or prune, actually means to cleanse or to clean. So when we mess up, if we truly put ourselves under what the good book says, that the good book can then cleanse us, that can clean us off, then we can bear more fruit. So the text makes it very clear that the purging Jesus spoke of is really through what's written here. So if you make a habit of reading what's in here consistently and putting into practice a lot of what's in here, then this in and of itself will be a cleansing agent for you. True. Because if we have to put ourselves where it says here, you have to abide in the vine. So you have to purposely and intentionally put yourself in a situation where you allow what's written in the book to clean you off. And it also gives us a picture, really, of the pains that God goes through when He prunes us, so that we'll have more fruit. So God uses situations. God uses situations to clean us from the dirt that's in our lives so that we'll bear more fruit. How many times haven't your life been rattled a little bit? And when your life's been rattled a little bit, the stuff that's been hanging on you sometimes falls off, and you can see things a little differently or a little brighter when you go through stuff.
True.
Psalm said, in the book of Psalms, it says, how can a young man cleanse his way? The answer is by taking heed according to what's in the book.
Right.
My paraphrase. So pruning, we grow, but we must be willing to get cleaned up from time to time, so we will grow. Yesterday we had some friends at the house, and I asked Christina to give our dog Maddie a bath. Well, Maddie, before the bath, smelled like a dog. And you know, dogs sometimes they smell in ways that aren't very sweet smelling to guests that come to the home that maybe they don't have dogs or they're not used to having dogs. So I wanted to make sure that Maddie smelled good. So a dog groomer told us that if you use the laundry detergent, or the dish detergent, Joy, it will keep fleas down. So we've been bathing her in Joy now for a number of months. So after Maddie has a bath, she smells like joy. She's joyful. She's joy smelling. So does Maddie like getting a bath all the time? No. In fact, when she's put in the bath wash basin, she's not happy at all. But once she gets done, for our noses anyway, she smells good. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're a dog. I'm not suggesting that we're an animal. I'm not suggesting that we're going to smell like joy after we place ourselves under what's written in the book that can cleanse us from stuff. But we have to be proactive in this process, by the way. It doesn't say that God grabs us by the neck and scrubs us like you would a child that didn't like to take baths. That's not what it says at all. It says, as we abide, as we put ourselves under the direction of what's in the book, then God allows stuff in our lives to clean us and to cleanse us from stuff that we shouldn't have on us at all anyway. Now the third P in this mathematical formula, P times 4 equals P, is people. Man, people can make you or break you in a big way. There's a great story about Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille O'Neal, for those who don't know, was a basketball star. 7'1". 7 feet tall and 1 inch. Now, I've done a little bit of homework on him, and as a kid, his fellow students would call him Sasquatch, because he was so tall, and probably with height came large feet. And he also had a stutter. So not only was he tall, and according to some friends, he didn't play basketball that great. So he was called Sasquatch, and he was called some other nasty names because he couldn't talk that great. So he was, frankly, very quiet most of his childhood, because he was, again, the quote oddball, being tall, didn't talk very clearly, so he didn't want to make a scene. Long story short, once upon a day, his dad came to him, who was in the Army. I'm pretty sure it was the Army. And he said, either you need to join the Army, because you're not going to stay home all day. You're going to join the Army or go talk to the college coach and see if you can get a scholarship. Longer story short, he went and talked to the coach. At that time was Coach Brown, and in the 80s he was invited to be part of the team. And at that time he grew to 7'1", but at that time he was only 6'9", and he couldn't play very well. He just couldn't play very well. But what was very interesting that his coach said, quote, he was a joy to coach. He had plenty of talent, but no ego. He had plenty of talent, but no ego. You know what's really ugly? When people have talent and they have ego. So you have to build wider doors because their head is so big for them to squeeze into a room. And oftentimes they forget that when they're out running, their feet sweat too. They have to take a shower regularly. They have to go to the bathroom regularly. So they're no different than you and I, really. You know what I'm saying? So Shaq O'Neal, he had at least one person in his life, coach, that propelled him, that believed in him so much that he was not going to allow Shaquille O'Neal to give up on what he wanted to do. So one day, while Shaq was getting ready to play a big game, Coach came to him a couple of days before and said that there was a lady who has a boy in the hospital, not doing that great, and she would really like you to call him up on the phone and just talk to him. This is like a day and a half before this major game. So when you're preparing for a major game, your focus is on that major game. It's not distracted by going out, hanging out, having fun, and getting all discombobulated with other stuff going on in your mind. You want to focus on the game. So this mother called up the coach. The coach said about her sick son, just, would you mind, because I'm not sure if he's going to be here in 24 hours, and I just would like you to call him up. So he didn't only call him up, but he went to see him in the hospital. Sang to him. Shaquille, can you imagine hearing Shaquille O'Neal sing to you? I don't know if he can sing or not. I know he can play ball, but he sat with this boy for hours, rubbing his head, playing games and singing with him, just making a difference, realizing what the priority was, because Coach invested in Shaquille O'Neal. So what did Shaquille O'Neal do? He paid it forward, didn't he? How many of us have forgotten that there's people in our lives that have invested in us? And I would suggest to you that it's your responsibility and my responsibility to pay it forward. Because where we've arrived, wherever that is, whether it's here or somewhere in between, we didn't get there by ourselves. We got there with the help of somebody or other people in our own lives. People can take you places, or they can break you in places. They can take you places or break you in places. So you have to choose your people carefully. The older I've gotten, I'm old now. I'm ancient, I have gray hair. So I think I have a little wisdom, but not nearly as much as most. I'll add that in there too. But you have to choose your people carefully. Because the people that you, there's so many quotes about this, but the people that you hang around most, you eventually become. So if you want to hang around the right kind of people, shouldn't it be incumbent upon all of us to hang around the right kind of people instead of the wrong kind of people? It flips me out how some young people hang around people from our point of view who aren't going anywhere at all. But the young person that's following these people, individuals, teenagers, don't know that they're not going anywhere. We have to walk in those shoes and pay that fine and pay the years of experience to see these people that aren't going anywhere. And you see people following them blindly like the pipe or the books, right? They keep following them even though they're not going anywhere at all. Solomon, again, the guy, he had a lot of wives, he had a lot of girlfriends, but he was a smart dude. Not necessarily in that arena, but just make sure I'm clarifying that. But he says, he who walks with wise men shall be wise. He who walks with wise men shall be wise. Listen, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. But the companion, so again, I go back. Those whom you hang around, you tend to become. I've heard stories that people were with the wrong people at the wrong time and they got in trouble just because they were with the people.
That's right.
Don't get me started. There's a story back in 1895. You're a young Russian immigrant named Samuel, and you just showed up in Mobile, Alabama. Unfortunately, you're already in violation of one of the South's many unwritten rules. This was one of the rules back then. Only one prominent Jew per town. Only one prominent Jew per town. Disgruntled, you hop on the nearest train to find a new place to make your start. What do you find? A train car filled with soon-to-be rotten bananas bound for the north. At this point, you can do two things. Ride the train like a hobo, or buy the bananas at an enormous discount and hustle them for a profit until you're the richest man in New Orleans and own United Fruit, the biggest fruit company in the world. So you can find all kinds of reasons why you can't and shouldn't. Maybe you kicked out of this, or maybe ignored in that way. But there's always a way. There's always around the mountain, or through the mountain, or under the mountain, or over the mountain.
Amen.
Jack Johnson, one of the first African-American heavyweight champions in the world, he was the son of former slaves. Eventually, he found his calling in boxing. But being poor and black, the story says, he had to make his living. He had to make his way into the ring the hard way. He first, the fight ended up and finished on a beach. He was a prize fighter and ended up winning $1.50. $1.50. Because he was too poor to hire a boxing scientist, as they called it back then. And that, in today's terms, is called a coach. He would deliberately prolong the fights to learn more about how things worked in the ring. He extended them to 20 plus rounds just to learn more about the culture and the science in the ring. In fact, he knew that learning from a fight, he said again, he knew that learning from a fight was more important than winning when you're just starting out. He says that's a practice that would take tremendous amounts of self-discipline, even if your hobby wasn't getting punched at by strangers. And this is how Johnson's unique fighting style developed. He would fight defensively at first, waiting for his opponent to tire out, and then pounce in the later rounds when his opponent no longer had it in him to fight back. Who does that remind you of in semi-modern times? Muhammad Ali? Same thing, right?
Sure.
1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse number 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse number 11 says this. Again, this P is about people. People can take you, or people can break you. People can encourage you, or people can discourage you. People can give you hope, or people can leave you hopeless. So we should choose our people carefully. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. This is talking about Christians, about religious people. Verse 11, 1 Corinthians 5:11. But actually I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not to even eat with such a one. This is talking about religious folk who wear the cross on their head, and wear the garb and the uniforms, and they look all holy. Have you ever met people that looked all holy until they opened their mouth and you realize that they ain't holy at all? And then you met people that didn't look holy, H-O-L-Y, that didn't look holy at all, but they're some of the most holy people on the planet. So you really can't necessarily always judge, but you can judge by people's actions and their words. So there's several ways that you can maximize, or leverage is probably a better word, the people in your life. Write it down. Other people's knowledge. Why would you sometimes want to reinvent the wheel when somebody else has invented the wheel? To me, that doesn't make any sense. So the question is, who do you need to know that knows what you need to know? Again, who do you need to know that knows what you need to know? And for me, a large percentage of what I need to know is written in books. Now, if I don't pick up the book, if I don't find the book, then read the book, ingest the book, swallow the book, then how am I going to learn what these people know if I don't read the stuff that maybe this is a good starting point for some of us to get into the book? Because there's a whole lot of answers. Even though this was written 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, there's still a whole lot of answers in the book that can help us today with the issues that we're going through right now. How about other people's energy? Have you ever just gotten around people that are so fired up that before you walked into the room you were kind of down, but by the time you left the room you thought you could take on the world because you chose to hang around some energetic people, but that same shoe fits the other way too. You come into a room that, man, you are just ready to take on the world, and by the end of the hour you're in the room, you're now empty because the people in the room are empty, because the people didn't see the opportunity that you saw. How about other people's successes? I'll go back to the first one. That you can leverage other people, what they've done well, the price that they've paid, you can leverage that price for your own growth. Don't you think that that's how people do it who've made it to places? They haven't reinvented really much of anything. They just stood on the shoulders of giants and they stood and they stood and they stood and they stood. That's really all it is. It's not rocket science, right? How about other people's failures? One quote says, man can either buy his wisdom or borrow it. Buying it, he pays in time and trouble, but borrowing it saves him time, money, and trouble. Hence, I go back to books. Books are great sources of information. Imagine if you had to hire some of these smart people at what? $5,000 an hour, $10,000, $15,000 an hour. Instead of $29.95 plus shipping for their book. I don't know, $29, let's say $35, $38, including to get the book to your house, versus $10, $12, $15,000 an hour. No brainer to me. But most people don't even do that. How about other people's ideas?
That's right.
How about using their ideas as springboards to do things that maybe you want to accomplish in your own life? And this is a big one too. Other people's contacts. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, in fact, a lot of times it's who you know, and then who knows that person. Because if you can build credibility via your integrity, via your honesty, via your good word, then that can be leveraged not just for yourself, obviously, but for the benefit of other people. So again, the 4 P's are problems, pruning or cleaning, people, and the fourth one is pressure. Pressure. Just the word pressure makes me dizzy. Turn over to Matthew chapter 13, the Message paraphrase. Matthew chapter number 13, the Message paraphrase says this, starting in verse 1. About that same time, Jesus left the house and sat down on the beach. In no time at all, a crowd gathered along the shoreline, and forcing him to get out into a boat, using the boat as a pulpit, he addressed his congregation telling stories. Isn't that interesting how Jesus told stories all the time to make a point? What's the saying I learned? That stories sell and facts tell. You can give a whole bunch of information and people, you can see the whites of their eyes. But once you tell a story, they can remember the story. It's just human nature, and Jesus got it. Jesus told stories all the time. He wasn't too deep in a whole lot of anything. But he sure told some deep stories that people weren't really understanding that it was really deep until they got home and realized, oh, wait a minute. That's what he meant. Verse 3. What do you make of this? A farmer planted seed, and he scattered the seed. Some of it fell on the road, and the birds ate it. Some of it fell in the gravel and sprouted quickly, but didn't put down roots. So when the sun came up, it withered just as quickly. Some fell in the weeds, and as it came up, it was strangled by the weeds. And some fell on the good earth and produced a harvest beyond his wildest dreams. Now, during the most stressful times in our lives, guess what? You and I have the ability to dry up and not allow the seeds to take root. Maybe hurt can cause us to dry up. Maybe discouragement can cause us to dry up. For me, there's times that I use distraction to get my mind off of the pressure that I'm going through. And a variety of us have pressures that we try to run from. Sometimes those distractions help you get through that pressure. And that's not always a bad thing. But pressure comes with all of us. Pressure comes when times are really forcing you to really squeeze out of you that stuff that shouldn't be in you anyway. That's what pressure does. Now, what do all these 4 things have in common? Problems, pruning, people, and pressure. Well, they equate to, or the byproduct of people or problems and pruning in people and pressure is performance. You perform better when you leverage problems, pruning, people, and pressure. You get better at what you do when you leverage what is going on around you. Most of the time, excellent performance is accomplished via these four things. But really, we don't even think about it. So if you want to excel, shouldn't you surround yourself with people and pressure and people that will clean you up and really enable the problems that you're going through be a stepping stone instead of a stumbling block? So you can either waste those situations that you're going through or use the situations that you're going through, depending if you see the glass as half empty or half full. Over in 2 Corinthians, one scripture says, He comforts us when we are in trouble so that we can share that same comfort with others in trouble. We share in the terrible sufferings of Christ, but also in the wonderful comfort He gives. I know King James says that a different way. In Ecclesiastes, that dude has some smarts about him. He says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift. Aren't you glad that the race is not to the swift? You know what I'm saying? It says, nor the battle to the strong, neither bread to the wise, nor yet the riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all.
Amen.
So the good, the bad, and the ugly happens to all of us as in humanity. But what we do with all those things can either trip us up or help us climb up. Big difference here. Albert Einstein says, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. Albert Einstein, again, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. A guy named Walter Elliott said, perseverance is not a long race, it's many short ones, one after another. Short ones, one after another. So you and I have a choice to either reject the 4 Ps, or maybe think that you can get to a high way of performing well without the 4 Ps. But unless you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth, most of us have to go through those 4 Ps in some form or some way. A guy named Charles writes, when athletes experience pressure, they can be a tendency to help them tense up, overthink, and struggle to make the correct decisions. Anxiety, the story says, can soar, which promotes confusion and indecision. Self-doubt can increase, and a lack of focus on the task at hand can happen. This is why we need to, quote, practice pressure. Practice pressure. Practicing pressure means we put ourselves in high pressure areas in training. If we experience a pressure situation for the first time, anxiety could tend to build, but coaches can stage moments of practice, allowing for our minds to get used to it through repetition. They allow themselves to learn that pressure is a good thing. That stress is a good thing. That problems are a good thing. That pruning is a good thing. It's rehearsal for the big game. My college coach, the story says, Joe Wells, came up to me and told me some very soothing words. He told me to, listen, forget the last match and focus on this brand new match. It really enabled me to rationalize and concentrate on the task at hand. Then he somehow managed to make me smile. I took a deep breath, taking in all the oxygen I could. I paused for a few minutes, just relaxing and focusing, and then he realized that just bring it on. I can do this. I don't have to worry about that last game, because that last game is that last game. It's ancient history now. Focusing on what I'm doing right now. Paul said to press on, to forget the stuff. I've said this 100 times here, but Paul has some major baggage. Major emotional regret, man. He did some pretty nasty stuff as a younger man. And he encouraged us to forget the past, to continue forward, right? So the trick is to get those butterflies you have in your stomach, as one author says, to fly in formation. That's hard to do sometimes, because you get all these butterflies going on when you're doing something new. But it's real effort to get those butterflies to fly in formation so it's not so scary anymore. Someone says life's not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but it's how well you bounce. Wow, isn't that true? I mean, some of us, once you hit the ground, you just want to stay on the ground, because now you don't have to, it's no work to stay on the ground. It's work to get back up and get smacked across the face again. Another person says that the drops of rain make a hole in the stone, not by violence, but by falling often. That consistency, that paying the price over and over and over again, whether you really feel like it at the time or not. Pressure has a way of clarifying what's important in life, doesn't it? Pressure has a way of really clarifying what's important, because stuff that was important before that tight and confining place isn't really so important anymore. So what's important gets put in that pressurized container, that situation you're in, so that other stuff that you thought that mattered outside that aren't very. So it reprioritizes, in other words, what's important in your life. Rick Warren said, the greatest ministry will flow out of your pain. Your greatest ministry will flow out of your pain. So the agony that you've gone through over the years, the pain, the struggle, the difficulty, can really bring the most clarification to what you should be doing in your life. So should we ignore people? Should we ignore problems? Should we ignore pruning or cleaning? No, because those 4 P's can really recreate a passion in you to do the stuff that you were born to do anyway. So what I'm saying to you is, I will probably regret this within the next week, what I'm about to say, but shouldn't we embrace this pressure? Shouldn't we embrace the pruning? Shouldn't we embrace the people? Shouldn't we embrace the problems? Do we have to enjoy them in the middle of the embrace? Have you ever hugged somebody that, they didn't bathe for a week, and, we were at MVA the other day, and there was this guy standing to my left, and I can tell he didn't like showering. See, I was trying to be cool about it. I'm just standing there waiting, what you do at the MVA, and you just wait, and I didn't want to be too obvious, and that wasn't far enough, so I moved a little farther, and 4 feet just wasn't enough, so I'm moving a little farther away. And then eventually I had a reason, I had an excuse to go about 12 feet away, and I was fine. But there are people in your life that, there's situations in your life that you must embrace that you don't like to embrace. It smells, it's painful, it's emotional. But in the middle of it can come some very good things. In the middle of it, do you have to enjoy it? No, I'm not suggesting that you necessarily enjoy it, but that you look for the opportunities in the middle of the pruning, in the middle of the problems, in the middle of all this stuff.
Amen.
So as I close here today, don't waste your pain, is what I'm trying to probably get across more so than anything else here. You can't change what happened to you. You can't change what people did to you. You can't change all the bruises and the bleeding and all the aches and all the pain. You can't change it. I'm not suggesting that we have to mentally go back in time to undo what can't be undone. But what are you going to do with the bruises? What are you going to do with the pruning? What are you going to do with the pressure now? Are you going to curse it? Are you going to hate it? Are you going to fight it? Are you going to stand on it and use it as a springboard to take you to places that maybe you haven't thought that you could even go to? It's called reframing. That's really what this whole text is about, to reframe what you're going through today to set you up for a situation tomorrow that can be good for you instead of such a struggle.